I see you.
Good.
Good.
Okay. Well, let me open my presentation. And thank you for the invitation to be here. I wish I could be with you in person, but that's a long flight for Friday afternoon. Thank you for your commitment or your excitement about the Power Platform. I know the customers that you're engaging with and helping. Appreciate your dedication to learning and expanding and finding new ways in which you can help them take advantage of this incredible tool, the Power Platform. As an introduction to myself, I started using what became the Power Platform back when it was called MSCRM 1.0. That was 21 years ago, and I was just a child, but I started implementing Dynamics Microsoft CRM at that time, and found that it was such a powerful tool to be able to help different customers and adapt to whatever problems they needed to solve because of the flexibility of the platform. Of course, over the years, it's grown dramatically, and I've seen a lot of things come in, but the constant part of it has been the data that's sitting in the middle of Dynamics or sitting in the middle of Dataverse, really. In Dataverse, we have this really rich source of data that customers can take advantage of. And today I want to show you a little bit of how I help customers take advantage of the data that's sitting in Dataverse. But more importantly, I'd like to introduce you to ways in which you're going to be able to take advantage of the data inside of Dataverse to really be able to answer questions and solve problems that customers have through analytics, reporting, and other data activities that go on. So I'm going to start early on with just a quick introduction. And today, the need for businesses to be able to take advantage of the data has never been greater. You're seeing both data being captured for reporting and analytics, but even more importantly, the data being captured for AI and the data that's needed to be able to power the machine learning and AI tools that are coming out in order to be able to help customers solve that. It's such a great combination, Dataverse and the AI revolution, because Dataverse has such strong data in it. After a user has been using it and organization has been capturing either their sales or their conversations with customers, service cases, or whatever you're using Dataverse or Dynamics for, that all that information becomes this really rich source that can drive our Power AI agents, and we're seeing that more and more going forward. I think over the next few months you'll see announcements really emphasizing the strength of using Dataverse with AI agents like you'll find inside of Fabric. So let's talk about how we got here and what has happened over time. It's really started on the Fabric side, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Fabric itself. You're probably familiar with Power BI, and hopefully you've heard of Fabric. Fabric is just a platform that's grown up around Power BI to extend all the other pieces in which and the other pieces of data needs that customers have. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. Customers face incredible complexity when they're trying to find which tools they want to use to be able to take advantage of their data. This graphic or this visual here represents thousands of different products that are on the market that can be used to help customers with data problems. The challenge is maybe one tool does a phenomenal job of helping a customer do one specific task, and another product does a great job at doing another task. And yet another tool is used for reporting, and another tool is used for real-time intelligence. Suddenly you have this mix of tools in your environment, and each one has to be stitched together and connected so they talk to each other, so they can work together. And as you add additional elements, the number of interconnections just grows exponentially. What was needed was to be able to take this mess or this large set of options and say, how can a customer really take advantage of this? And how can we make a platform, much like the Power Platform brought together lots of different tools, like an Automate tool and the Dataverse piece and the front end and the web piece and the different automation tools that are there. How do we bring that together in the data world, much like you've done in the Power Platform world? So think of Microsoft Fabric as being sort of like the Power Platform of data. It includes things like Data Factory, which, if you're familiar with Azure Data Factory, the Data Factory side of this comes into Fabric. Data engineering using Spark and other advanced technologies for managing your data. Data warehousing, data lakehouse, going into data science for machine learning, real-time intelligence, of course, Power BI. But again, we're bringing those together and they're sitting on top of a common foundation. So rather than a mix of a lot of tools out there, you bring together a common ecosystem where the tools can work together and help you solve the customer's problems. You may or may not consider yourself a data person. I don't think I originally thought of myself as a data person, but I was interested in making sure I could solve a customer's problem. And when I went to implement Dynamics back in the old days, when I would implement CRM, I spent a lot of time making sure that customers could see the data that was going into it. But I really found that that unless I spent time making sure that the business leaders, the owners of the projects or the other team leaders, unless they had reports that they could act on, they didn't have an ability to, or I didn't give them the opportunity to really appreciate all the data that was sitting in their environment. And as more people took advantage of that, they became more excited about what was going on inside of the Power Platform. So it was a virtuous cycle. As we gained more data in the Power Platform, we built better reports on top of it. And the better the reports we built, the better people would say, oh, it's valuable to me to make sure that all my data is up to date inside the Power Platform. So very much a virtuous cycle. And if you want to be successful in implementing Dynamics or Dataverse or Power Apps into a process where you're really helping a customer, you really need to make sure you're able to take good advantage of the data that's in it. And that's where we're going to talk about today a little bit more. So there's no way I can cover all of this material today. I have provided it as you can get the presentation. You're welcome to grab it, and I'm happy to share anything I have today. I'm happy to share with you. I'll also share some links to a GitHub where I have some samples, and I also have a YouTube. Like everybody, I have a YouTube video that talks through some of these elements a little bit more in depth. So I want to show you pieces of Dataverse and how Dataverse specifically can talk to Fabric and how you would connect Fabric and Power BI back to Dataverse. And at first I'm going to talk about the things that are built directly on Dataverse, things like Power Apps, Dynamics 365 Sales, Customer Service, Field Service. Those elements have a special relationship with Power BI and Fabric, and that we can use the TDS endpoint. That TDS endpoint, the tabular data stream endpoint, can reach back from Power BI and talk directly through a SQL endpoint and be able to query that data. Very important that that's available. It has a lot of advantages. The advantage is like it's very much when I query it, I'm getting the latest data. And also the data is being filtered according to my security model inside a Dataverse. And so that the data that's coming out is filtered to who I am and what permissions I have inside a Dataverse. Now, because it has that layer of security on top of it, it also tends to be better suited for small individual reports. Reports that are designed for one person to see, what am I working on, or what are the deals that I have in my pipeline right now. When you start moving up to scaling that into larger and larger reports, it's not really ideal for that. We have other options, and we talk about what those other two major options are. The first one is an older option that was available, and it applies to both Dataverse as well as Dynamics Marketing, Finance and Operations, as well as all the Dataverse platform pieces. And that's what is moving the data through Azure Storage and putting Synapse in front of it. We call this Synapse link. That's not an official product name, but we just refer to it as a link between the Power Platform and Fabric using Synapse. And we refer to it as such. It's a Synapse link, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it works. But think about it as the data is routed out of Dataverse and into Synapse or into Azure, and then that's available to Fabric via shortcuts. An alternative to that is actually even simpler, and it's one where the data stays inside of Dataverse and is provided to Fabric via shortcuts. So there's really no need to necessarily transfer data. It's just a shortcut or a hyperlink back to the data that exists inside of Dataverse. We call that Fabric Link. At the end of in both Fabric Link and Synapse Link, the data is made available to Fabric and Power BI using shortcuts. So the data doesn't actually move from Dataverse or from Azure. It just becomes available, and I can query the data. And so it makes it very lightweight and very easy to avoid creating even additional copies down the line. So we'll talk about Fabric Link and Synapse Link, but I wanted to show you the high level just so that you see that they both result in shortcuts. They both come from Dataverse. It's just a matter of how they get there, the path. So let's take a look at the TDS endpoint to start with. This again is the simpler approach. And in this case, the database talks directly to Power BI. It goes through the app layer, through that security model, and becomes an easy connection over there. Very, very simple to do. But let's go a little step further where we say, let's look at the Synapse Link approach. In this case, data from Dataverse is being sent down as CSV files and incremental CSV files, and then a Spark job kicks off every 15 minutes and turns the data into a Delta Lake using Parquet files. And that Delta Lake is the source of the shortcuts. And you see there's a dotted line back to the Lakehouse in Fabric, just meaning that the data is still sitting in Azure, but it's just available via shortcut in Fabric. So that's the Synapse Link approach. Now let's take a look at the Fabric Link approach. In this case, it still has a Delta Parquet, but the Delta Parquet stays inside of Dataverse. And so the number of moving pieces reduces a lot. It all stays inside of Dataverse and is available to Fabric via shortcut. And I have some new information available to you that I'll share in just a moment about an upcoming feature of this. But it is inside of Dataverse. It's compressed to roughly, if you have a database of 100 gigabytes, it's going to be 15 to 30 gigabytes that are added to Dataverse to store that Delta Parquet. It's very compressed. It also doesn't need the indexes that are a majority of the storage inside of Dataverse. It includes long-term retention. I say it's hourly incremental refreshes, but it's actually now every 15 minutes. So roughly every 40 minutes for 95% of or 95% of the data or less becomes available within about 40 minutes of latency today. I've got another announcement about that coming up. The compute and storage is all wrapped up together. Sometimes we'll see people have questions about the charges about it, but it's really because it's both compute and storage all wrapped up together inside of Fabric Link. And there's no Azure resources necessary. Sometimes, especially as a Power Platform consultant, if you need to then ask to get the Azure team to spin up additional resources for you, you have to stop and take donuts to them and make them happy because they're reluctant to spin up resources. This Fabric Link approach is very easy because it works directly with Dataverse, and there's a very nice relationship, and you can spin it up and be up and running without having to set up a platform or infrastructure in place. So let's compare the two. So I mentioned that on Dataverse, the costs are associated with the Delta Parquet inside of Dataverse. And on the other side, the cost of the storage and compute is all wrapped up in the Azure Spark and Synapse compute there. That, depending on how quickly you run that or how frequently you run that Spark job, it is configurable. You can run it as fast as every 15 minutes or as slow as once a day. But depending on how fast you run that, the compute cost of that can be high. On the left side, I've got good news. Although it's a platform you configure, it's a few clicks and it's up and running. The nice thing that's happening, and this will be announced in a few weeks publicly, but I'll share it with you, is the refresh speed is changing. Instead of every 15 minutes for a refresh to happen, the refresh changes to pretty much a continuous refresh. They're changing the way it's writing. It's not available yet, but it is in a very, very, very early private preview. We'll see some changes coming along before it becomes more widely available. And what's happening is it's changing so that it writes continuously, and so the latency becomes less than 5 minutes. So you have access to very, very fresh data available to your report in Fabric. I see a question coming up. Do you have any questions? Yeah, post them in the chat. If you can paste them, if you can paste them in English, that would be helpful. But Aki can help me out if it's in if there's a translation. So in this case, there is a speed associated with Fabric Link where all of this is taking place inside of Dataverse. There's speed associated with that and simplicity of deployment. Let's look at kind of the difference or the evolution of how these implementations kind of run. And I want to walk through kind of a perspective of the simpler to the more enterprise approach to this. In the simplest approach, and this is the one that's very common, where Dataverse, we have a lakehouse with shortcuts back there, and we really go from that raw data, and inside the report, we clean up the data to make it shaped and looks like what we want it to look like, and provide a report for that. That's very easy to set up for your first report. It's one of the simplest things you can do is getting that. And I would encourage you to start this way just to get comfortable with what does the data look like? How do I shape it? How do I make it ready for a report? How do I build my data model off of it? It's a great way to get started. It's very easy to get going. However, it can become a little tedious as you start moving up into complexity, and as you gain momentum in your deployment. You may want to simplify it a little bit by, instead of having all the logic built into the reports, you create views in your lakehouse. I tend to start with this approach most often. I create a view that says, as you know, if you've used a Dynamics case entity or an opportunity entity or an account entity, there's a lot of fields, and only a handful of those fields are actually needed for the report downstream. For a performance reason, you want to make sure that the data that you're pulling into the report is only the data that's necessary. You don't want to pull in data that you're not going to use, because that just adds to the latency and the speed it takes to, the amount of time it takes to refresh those reports. You want to make that as clean and simple as possible. So moving all this logic into views allows multiple reports to take advantage of that logic. So if you've built your account table as a view, and you have the fields that are important to your organization, you have them as a view, then you have multiple reports, and they can all point to that same copy of the account table and take advantage of that. And so it speeds up the deployment, or speeds up that, as well as you ensure that you have control over the name, the model itself, and the entity that's being used. So, but again, this is helpful, but then you start seeing, again, there's this number of reports that are out there. Additionally, every time a report is created, and every time a report needs to be updated, it has to go get a new copy of the data from this view. So the raw data is sitting in the shortcut, the enriched data is sitting in this view, or bronze, silver, gold, some people call it. But every one of these reports has to go get a copy of the data to keep it up to date, because each one of them is holding onto the data inside of it, and then the reports are being built off of that. What we can do even beyond that to really start scaling upwards is to take advantage of a process we refer to as direct lake. In this case, we're moving up, adding another layer or adding another piece to it, where we say, okay, we have our shortcuts here in the lake house, and we have views of it, but we've put them into a warehouse. And this is a simple warehouse. It's not one of the complex enterprise. It's a powerful warehouse, but you don't have to spend much time. I set mine up in a short afternoon and had moved my views there. And then I went ahead and set up tables where I landed the data. And because I had the data in tables, this cleaned up, curated data in tables here, I can create my semantic models using Direct Lake. Direct Lake allows you to take the data, all the data will sit inside of, let me zoom in here. All the data stays inside this curated table. And then the Direct Lake, the reports, when the report is open, it goes back to the curated data to retrieve that data immediately. So anytime there's no refresh that has to take place between the curated tables and the reports. Those reports are, as soon as someone opens it, it has the most recent data. Now you could do that in direct query mode, but you may have heard of direct query mode, but direct query mode tends to be very slow in terms of large sets of data and numbers of interactions. It can be very slow. So if I move to Direct Lake, I have that advantage of being able to say, once the curated data is in my warehouse, all my reports can consume that data. And as soon as somebody opens that report, they're getting the latest copy of the data from that. Let me show you an example of that. So I'm going to minimize this, and I'll show you an example. So here is my Dynamics 365 environment, and I've got service cases being created inside this environment. So these cases are being generated over time. They're sitting here, and I've got a report built on top of it. Let me go to the analytics area. And this sales, let me show you the sales report first. So as you see this report loading, it's loading cold, and I'm pulling in all the opportunities, and they're being pulled in from a warehouse. It's being pulled in so I can report off of it. It's very fast. The interactivity is very nice. If this was in direct query mode, the interactions there would be long delays between interactions if I had data of any size. But as you notice, the interaction is very quick for that. Let me show you another table that actually has more data in it. My service table in Dynamics. Again, this is a cold table, so it's loading up. And this service table is looking at about 9 million service cases in Dynamics. And with these 9 million service cases, I'm able to interact on those and show as a manager, I would be able to understand what's going on in these service cases, expand it and drill into different users and understand what's going on. But I really wanted to show you to you a scale in that we see these large data sets being pulled together and being taken advantage of using direct link. And direct link mode is only available with Fabric sitting on top of the tables. The tables can be in warehouse or in a lake house, but they're available now. And I encourage this approach as being the path forward for any customers that have lots of data that wants to take advantage of it and see that data showing up in very, very short term. I don't want to use the word real time because we actually have a faster way to get that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is an example. And by the way, I did go ahead and create these reports. I have a version of this which is in import mode that you can download. I've created it and I added it to my GitHub. I'm going to copy and paste that into the chat. And there are instructions if you'd like to take this and install it. I have a TDS version of this report, but there's instructions on how to build the report and how to take advantage of it there. So that's available to you. And while I'm here, let me go and get my YouTube. I'm not a YouTuber, but I have a few videos that explain different parts of using Fabric and Dynamics together. So we can take advantage of that. So let's go back to the presentation. I want to show you one more level of what we have. So in this case, again, we did say we have Dataverse talking to a warehouse where we have the data, and then using direct lake to query that and bring it into the reports, as well as into Fabric data agents for AI. Going a step beyond this, though, is you may want to separate out your engineering workspace that has your Fabric and your views, and then you want to create just a curated space that your end users have permission to see that. And you want to make that very easy for them to consume. You can actually split this into two different workspaces and have one for your development on your engineering side, and then have that feeding over to the curated tables that are available for reporting. Very easy to do that. And in fact, you can even say, if you needed to have two different workspaces, that's perfectly fine, where we have the raw data, the enriched, and the curated. But going further, we can actually move it into multiple workspaces, and they can all be feeding off that same data. So for instance, you may have a sales department, the sales reports that you want to have in a different workspace for service reports. But both of them have the same list of customers, but you can provide that and separate out the data according to the use case of users. You may have a situation where you want to have a consumption workspace that's only for managers with elevated privileges, or a consumption workspace that includes data from multiple Dataverse environments being fed together. Lots of opportunities for different ways to accomplish things, but it brings together the idea of we can make this data easy to consume for our end users and make it quick and refreshed and easy to and for them to take advantage of. Very important that we make sure we're really focused on solving that for the customer. So let's go forward off of this. And I want to show you just a quick look at what it takes to configure. I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but I just want you to see the basics of turning on Dataverse Fabric. To turn it on, the prerequisite is you do need to be an administrator in Dataverse. And you also need to have a Fabric capacity, and you have to be an administrator of that Power BI workspace. There is a requirement that the Dataverse tenant needs to be in the same Azure geographic region, or the Azure geography, I should say, as the Fabric capacity. So if I had a environment in Japan and a Fabric in Canada, I would need to make sure that I get a Fabric set up in Japan as well. So they need to be close together. But if I have one in East US and one in West US, that's fine because they're still in the same geography. Just to be aware of that as a potential. So to set it up, you would set up that workspace. You go ahead and create it. You can create it as a trial if you want and spin it up, and you give it a name, add a picture to it if you want to, and then pin it. Secondly, you would go into your Maker app, into the Dataverse Power Platform Maker app, and there's a blade called Azure Synapse Link, and you can pin that to your list. If you don't see it here, just click into more, and you'll find it there, and you can use a pin to add it to your list. And I go and pin it here. But it's important that you don't start here. You don't start on this. You don't create the link here, because this is the way you create the Synapse Link. Synapse Link. It's kind of redundant, but to create the Fabric Link version, we'll go to the list of tables. So if you click on the list of tables and you make sure you don't select anything, pull down the Analyze option, and you'll find a link to Microsoft Fabric there. That's how you create that Fabric Link piece, where it's so easy and it's all contained inside a Dataverse, and it creates links over in Fabric. You'll go through a wizard to give it settings, tell it which environment you're connecting from and what ones you're connecting to, select the Fabric workspace you're connecting to, and allow it to start running. But I'll be aware that in today's version of this, if it's a large environment, it can take several hours for it to create and fully populate. Soon, with the updated version of Fast Fabric, it will shorten that dramatically, because more things will be able to run in parallel. But today, just give it time, go get your coffee and enjoy your afternoon. It's going to take time for that data to populate. But once it's populated, it's only incremental updates that are being done after that initial load. Once you've had that time for it to move, you can go back to the Fabric Link area, go into that blade that says Azure Synapse Link, and you can see the list of tables. You'll see the tables in different states as they're being created. And you can refresh that. You can refresh the tables, several things there. It is useful sometimes as it's running or after it's had time to run to go ahead and use this Refresh Fabric Tables button here. That just pushes the latest metadata you have over to Fabric to make sure it's all in sync. Additionally, after you make changes to your tables, maybe you add a new table, maybe you add columns to a table or delete columns. Once you've published that inside a dynamic or Dataverse, go over here, hit publish, and make sure that it forces it. It'll pick it up on its next run or two, but it's nice to go ahead and force it and just sort of say, be sure you pick this up as soon as possible. So I tend to do that a lot. When you get over to Fabric Link, you'll see that initially a lot of the fields, the tables will show up as unidentified. That just means they're still working. That's still the initial sync that's going on. But over time, it will reflect and show a list of the tables there along with the data in them. There is a refresh button inside of Fabric if you want to use that to refresh it and just check to make sure it has the latest data and that's updated. So I'm going to keep moving forward for that. Once the data is in available, let's see, what is the question? What is a DC1 SKU? DCT1 SKU. I'm not sure what the DCT1 SKU is. I'll ask the other question. Is it going to create a replication inside of Dataverse if you create Fabric Link? Yeah, so it does create a copy of that data in that Delta Parquet, but as I mentioned, it does compress it. It's only somewhere between, I've seen it as little as 20% of the data that's in Dataverse. About 20% of that's added using that to create that Delta Parquet lake, the Delta Lake inside of Dataverse. So there is an increase to it, And that is an increase, but it's not a duplication. It's not a doubling of the data you have inside of Dataverse, because a lot of that data you have in Dataverse is indexes, and those aren't replicated. Let's take a look at how you explore this data and what's available within it. And I'll talk about it just a real high level. And again, get the slides. They'll give you a lot more depth of it. You can query the data using Spark. You can query it using SQL. I tend to like using SQL. That's just more comfortable for me. But whatever you like to engage with, you can query the data. Be aware that there are flags that say is delete equals null or is delete equals 0. That means that that's a record that hasn't been deleted. If a record inside a Dataverse is deleted, it will update the record in Fabric Link or Synapse Link. It'll update and change it to where the is delete flag will be set to 1, and the rest of the data except for the ID, the rest of the row except for the ID, will be cleared out. So if you have deletes and you're processing deletes downstream, you can use that information to go process it further downstream. Also, long-term retention is a cool feature that's coming in. Long-term retention, if you have long-term retention turned on in your environment, you can use Fabric Link to query both active records as well as long-term retention records with one query. You just have to set to check for whether data state equals 0, and that means it's an active record. If data state equals 1, that means it's a record that's moved into long-term retention. So very useful in those situations. If storage costs are a concern, using long-term retention will really lower that, and it actually lowers it more on the Dataverse side because it's removing all those indexes that consume so much information or consume so much storage. Once you have this information over in Fabric, you can connect to it using the SQL endpoint, and you just grab the name and the server string, and you can put it into Visual Studio. It's very easy. You just paste that. It's a long name for the server name. You just paste it in and give it a name, tell it the database name you're connecting to, and then tell it you're connecting with Microsoft Entra ID with MFA support, and then give it a friendly name. And that way, at that point forward, you can query that data inside Visual Studio as SQL. I'm going to move past some of these. These are helpful if you're building reports for the first time using that level up tool. Most of you are probably already aware of it. It gives you visibility into the field names, and that will be helpful downstream as you're creating your reports. One thing to be aware of is, and this is the last thing I'll cover in this report, in this part, except for the real time, is Dataverse security considerations. As you're aware, inside of Dataverse, you can have a very, very complex security model. Very complex. Most of the complexity tends to be around who can see what and who can change what. In the reports, we're only concerned with who can see what because we're not changing anything through the reports. But that complexity, if you try to create that complexity, it can be somewhat overwhelming. It can be very complex. However, there are some strategies to work with that and to understand how do you accept and how do you work with requirements that say, I want to use the same security I have in Dataverse. First option is the TDS endpoint. That's very good for simple, very small, simple reports. Perfectly fine for that. You can spin that up. You don't have to do anything other than turn on all you have to do is set up a Power BI report and you can use that. But scalability on it is a problem. Once you move to Fabric and Power BI reports where you're pulling the data outside of Dataverse, you need to control it in the semantic model. You can use row-level security. You can test against things like owners and divisions and territories and countries associated with that and say, I'm filtering it to just this. This person, if they're on this team, they can see this record. I have a full video on security modeling on my YouTube channel. I'd encourage you, if you run into a situation where a customer has questions about security, to take advantage of that. And finally, at the report level, you can have it set so that reports can be built and only a manager is allowed to see the report itself. And a user is not able to see that. A user that's not a manager just doesn't have permission to see that report. We do this quite often. So there's different ways in which you can control that access, but do be thoughtful about that when requirements come up, especially if somebody says just replicate Dataverse security. When you get into that, that's kind of a requirement is one that can cause you to regret that up front later if you accept a requirement to just duplicate Dataverse security if Dataverse is set up with a complex security model. There is a demo here of how to set up row-level security, how you can use it, as well as some comparison between the three. I'd encourage you to take advantage of that. I want to move over to one other area. I'll come back. This is not the end of the slide. I don't want to, let me minimize that for the moment. I'll come back to that in a moment. I want to show you something I've been working on with a customer of mine over the last week, where we're talking about a situation where the customer needed real-time reporting. Specifically, not just real-time, I want to see this report real-time, but they wanted to be able to respond in their warehouse to things that were happening as they happened. We used the example of a service case where a service organization that had a call center and they want to have a dashboard set up that's as people add new phone calls, they remove phone calls, they complete service cases, their new cases come up, or you think about an inventory where things are moving in inventory, being pulled from inventory. You have stock outs and things that happen in real time as pieces are being pulled off the shelf, they're updated, and you want to make sure that all that information is visible as that process happens. So it's kind of a specific use case. But in this case, I have an example where we're looking at service cases of customers. As those cases happen, as records happen, we start seeing records show up, and we have a dashboard showing, we'll let it refresh. I think I've got some, it's out of date. Let me create some new cases for us. And I'll create a storm here. So give it a moment here. As new service cases take place, we can listen to those in real time and have them start showing up. And the way we do that is using the plugin registration tool of Dataverse, which allows us to attach Dataverse to listen for Dataverse events like record creation, record deletion, inserts, updates for different entities. We can listen to that, and from that information, we can send that over. It can be sent up to and attached to a event stream in Fabric. This event stream is just a way of saying, I'm setting up a listener for events that are coming out of Dataverse or other systems. It can listen to any number of systems, but Dataverse is our example. And we're listening to those events coming in, and then we're going to route them over to our event house. And the event house is really just a Custo database with the query engine that we can listen to events that are coming in. And as those events arrive, they're being processed and captured real time and made available to the user to take advantage of. Let's see if any of these are showing up yet. So, but yeah, so it's an interesting approach. I'm going to be doing a full-blown demo of this at FabCon in the next couple of weeks. And so as a part of that, you'll see a video of this coming up. But if you have a situation where you have a customer who needs specialized reports in real time, please let me know. I'd love to hear about the situation, the customer's need. And again, it's a fairly limited or fairly specific use case to be able to build real-time reports on. You don't want to try to build a real-time report over everything that's happened over the last 3 years. that's not, real time is not really relevant for that. But if you're looking for things that happen in the last 4 minutes, real time reporting can be really helpful for that. I'm going to pause here. I think I'm getting really close to the end of my time here, and I want to pause and check in with Aki. Are there any questions that I need to? So you see I see a question from you, Aki.
Yeah.
What is the data latency?
Yeah, I just explained, in this demo, because you're using real-time intelligence, so this is the real time, not just
Yes.
like 15 minutes real time or something like that.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. It's as those events happen, they're sending messages over saying, "Hey, there's a create, there's an update, there's an insert, there's a delete," and you're picking those up and responding to them in real time. It's very very much a stream of data coming through that you're listening for.
Yep. And I don't think we have any further questions so far, other than the question I posted on the chat window. So,皆さん何かご質問があれば、なかなかスコットって、チャットチームの中でダイナミクスとかパワーアップス、パワーオートメイトとか、あとはデータバース関連でのスペシャリストなので、なんかこちらのなんか問題があったら全部スコットの方に話に行くんですけれども、逆に皆さんの会社の中でこういうファブリックを活用して、データバースと一緒にその連携させるとか、そこで悩んでいることがあればですね、ぜひとも私経由でスコットに話をすることができますので、はい、ぜひとも考えていただければというふうに思います。Okay, Scott. Looks like we don't have any further questions, so thank you very much for your joining us today, and I appreciate because it's your dinner time, but thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you all for your interest in the Power Platform and your interest in helping your customers.
Thank you. 最後にアンケート皆さん、お時間あればぜひ、書いていただければと思います。Okay, right on time.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I'll see you.